don't know if you've been paying attention, but Google just made one of the most important moves in fashion and retail to date. Now, this is more than just an AI update. What Google released at I/O Marketing Live was information about how they're embedding themselves into the fashion, retail, and luxury space, and mainly going to permanently change e-commerce. Now, this is important because I guess Google got tired of everybody using them as the poor example of searchability for clothing. And so they took it upon themselves to become a new layer in AI that takes out some of the friction in commerce and keeps people coming back to Google. Now, I do think this is genius because you've heard me say before, if you ever try to Google a product, how weird it is and how the search results come up a little bit off. But now that they're playing in the AI space, they're going to resolve this issue in several ways that absolutely will affect brands. And essentially, it will change how e-commerce is done permanently, as well as shift the importance of things like reviews, your product descriptions, and your visibility on AI platforms. My name is Jessica Couch. I'm a fashion and technology expert, and I go to conferences and do research so that you don't have to. And some of the biggest news of the week, in my opinion, is what just happened at Google I/O and Marketing Live. All right, so I spent the last 24 hours going through all the announcements and the press information as it relates to retail. I even took a look at some of the demos, which were pretty impressive. And there are 5 things that fashion brands should actually pay attention to from all of that news. And so I'm going to break those down for you. Now, these are not buzzwords per se. It's not really AI hype either. It's really infrastructure changes that are very important. So make sure you pay attention because missing this could cost you your customer. Google is trying to become the discovery layer, the recommendation engine, the checkout flow, and eventually the shopping assistant. And so for all of that, that's going to change how brands show up in the e-commerce space, what they need to prepare for, and how this is going to affect business in the future. And because it's Google, it's going to be big and a little bit unavoidable. So the first order of business is the universal cart. The universal cart is one of the most important announcements from the event because this is going to change exactly how people are shopping. Now, what Google is doing is creating a persistent shopping cart that works across all merchants across Google surfaces. So instead of every brand operating as its own isolated e-commerce destination, Google becomes the connective layer between the stores. So you browse a brand on Monday, you browse another one on Tuesday, you discover something new through search on YouTube, and Google keeps the cart experience intact. This matters because historically brands control the checkout experience, and now Google is inserting itself directly into that flow. And honestly, fashion should pay attention to this very carefully. Because the more checkout moves into Google's infrastructure, the less important the brand-owned e-commerce experience becomes. And we already know that a lot of people have had issues with the e-commerce experience, going to different sites, and there's a lot of time and money spent on driving that traffic to these sites. But eventually, it seems like Google could possibly eliminate this altogether, which means your e-commerce strategy has to change accordingly. Next, we have YouTube Commerce. The second thing that stood out to me was this idea about YouTube Commerce, because Google is now expanding its universal commerce protocol into YouTube shopping in the US. I actually think that this may end up being bigger than people realize because consumers are already using YouTube to do their discovery, and they're paying attention to things like haul videos and luxury reviews and sneaker breakdowns and styling commentary and fashion commentary and content all at the same time. So the behavior already exists, and I'm a big fan of creating technology for existing behavior. So what Google is doing now is operationalizing checkout infrastructure around those behaviors. So instead of watching a video, clicking a link, opening the link on another page, going to that page, finding that item, and possibly purchasing, all of that can be done in one click. So the transaction starts happening closer to the content where you're influenced anyway. And I think that's going to make a really big difference and changes what influencer commerce looks like. So that's something you absolutely need to pay attention to. And it gives influencers an opportunity to monetize in direct ways now, which is super exciting. So the next piece of updates that I thought was interesting is around Gemini Spark. I actually think people are overhyping this piece slightly in the short term, but underestimating it in the long term. Because the important piece isn't necessarily the AI assistant. The important part is that Google is clearly building towards delegated commerce. And what this means is that consumers are consistently telling systems what they want instead of manually searching for products, which is interesting because obviously instead of saying, I need a black blazer for women's, a consumer is starting to use natural language. And we've talked about the difference in the natural language, and it revolves around things like, I need something polished for a client dinner that's under $400. You have motivations included in that, price points, and words that typically have to interpret that request. So this changes how products are going to get discovered, not overnight, but absolutely directionally. This is absolutely where commerce is moving. Again, using natural language is the natural way that shoppers are now showing up for their discovery. And if platforms cannot bridge that gap, then they'll be left out of what's happening based on what these announcements are saying. So this is beyond SEO now. I called it AEO, but I'm sure it's another word for agentic commerce or an acronym that's better, but it's super important to know. So let's talk about the AI performance insights. So the next announcement is probably the most practical one for brands immediately. Google is introducing AI performance insights, which basically gives brands visibility into how they are showing up and appearing across AI-powered search experiences. As we've already discussed, because agentic commerce is such a big deal, brands have to change how they show up on these agentic platforms. But not only are they having a hard time figuring out how to show up, and there's plenty of tech tools for that, honestly, you can use our fashion tech directory, shameless plug, to figure out which AI agentic commerce tool is best for your company, but the tools do exist. However, Google is saying that what doesn't exist, the visibility on how well you show up or how poorly you show up in some of these platforms. And right now, a lot of our marketing execs absolutely don't know how well you are or are not showing up. So this becomes the next evolution of SEO. Not just ranking on a search page, but visibility inside generated recommendations and conversational search. So this is going to be super important as well. So everyone needs to pay attention to that. So the fifth thing I think is most important for brands and retail is the conversational attributes. Now, this one sounds boring at first, but it's actually extremely important for fashion. Fashion product data is evolving beyond rigid commerce taxonomy because consumers don't naturally search product databases in the same way that products are showing up in the database. So for example, no one's actually searching, I need a women's woven sleeveless midi dress. Instead, they're going to say, what do I wear in the summer to a wedding that's going to fit my body nice? I need something minimal, but not corporate. I want something that's pretty much basic, but quiet luxury. That's the way that people are speaking. And Google is now optimizing around natural language intent instead of pure keyword structure. For fashion brands, that means your product descriptions, metadata, catalog language suddenly matter a lot more. Now, there are a lot of companies that exist that can help you take your current product information and expand it so that it can show up properly on these platforms. And you can use the fashion tech directory to find what those are so that you don't have to be worried about whether or not you show up. Because we know that by Google making these changes, that this is going to be an overhaul of e-commerce and you're absolutely going to need to fall in line. So e-commerce teams are going to have to pay attention in a different way and create their strategies, utilize the right tech tools. And I would advise that you first clean up your product data, not eventually, but right now. Because every single one of these systems that we talked about depends on structured product information. And you can't just be lazy with it. It can't just be a description. You're going to have to clean it up in a way where consumers searching for the product, it can be matched properly. And as it shows up in your catalog and databases, it makes the most sense. You also have to take YouTube commerce seriously. Selling on YouTube, these hauls, the content, this is a place where fashion lives. And I do think that fashion massively underestimates YouTube's influence on purchasing behavior, but clearly Google does not. And third, you want to rewrite your product descriptions in the way that people actually speak. And while this can seem difficult, again, there's tools that can do that so that you don't have to put the wrong resources towards it. Most fashion e-commerce copy was written for databases and SEO, but now we're entering a new stage where you're going to have to rewrite your copy in a way for some of these platforms so that searchability and visibility are in your favor. And obviously, this is one of the better use cases of AI because we know that AI can expand on things and go on and on and on. And if it has the right type of information, it can help with your discoverability. And this is why I made a case for that qualitative analysis. So actually getting that qualitative data on how people talk about things, how they're describing it, putting that into your LLMs are going to be essential because that type of language is what's going to become searchable. So the big takeaway from all of this, it's not that AI is taking over fashion retail, it's that Google is becoming much more deeply embedded in how commerce happens online. And we should have expected this. Google has always been our first choice for search. And now discovery, recommendation, checkout, and product visibility are all something that Google is digging deep into to make sure that you are staying with them and that you're having a better experience. So at least we know they're listening. So discovery, recommendation, checkout, and product visibility, the entire layer is consolidated more tightly into Google's current ecosystem, which is going to be a great thing for brands if you are able to utilize the tools that are available and really understand how this is going to shift your brand. Fashion brands should be paying very close attention to all of this. So I'll link more information. I have a newsletter article coming out that will provide a couple more details so it can go in depth. So make sure you pay attention to that. If you are looking for some tools to help you expand on your product descriptions, absolutely use the Fashion Tech Directory to find which tools are going to be best for you. Ultimately, I think that this is going to be a huge deal for e-commerce companies as we continue to see consumer behavior shift and AI creating layers to ease that friction, which it's perfect timing. So let me know what you think. Make sure you follow Fashion Technology 101. We have really dope events coming up. I will be covering Fashionology, which is happening June 6th in New York, which is going to be an incredible, incredible day of fashion and technology, experts coming together to talk about the industry at the Glass House. So make sure you pay attention. And coming up in August and September, I'll have some announcements around informal markets and a partnership that we're working on that is going to bring business solution centers to the brands that show up at these events. So there will be an opportunity to get connected and to do something very new and revolutionary. My name is Jessica Couch. I'm a fashion and technology expert. I hope you enjoyed this and make sure you stay subscribed, share these videos, and let me know what you think.